Kate's first husband, and that's pretty much all I know about him. Kate was reluctant to talk about the marriage. It was unusually brief and, from what I gather, wholly unpleasant. I did my best not to pry. Still, the idea that there was a man before me would sometimes tug on my insecurities. I usually kept my feelings to myself, as I didn't want to open any old wounds, but now I'm starting to wonder what happened to him. I met Kate shortly after I finished my undergrad at the Houston Symphony. I'm not sure why I went, since I never preferred classical music, but I couldn't complain about free tickets. Unbeknownst to me, I would sit next to my future wife during Mozart's Requiem. Kate and I talked the whole time. It was like I had known her for years. I mustered up the courage to ask her to dinner, and have been madly in love with her ever since. Kate was a bit older than me, which I had no problem with. She was just finishing up her psychiatry residency when we first met. Kate came from a wealthy and posh English family with long ties to the banking industry and scientific discovery. They intimidated me because I was the first person in my family to even complete high school. We didn't see Kate's family much, and I got the impression that they disapproved of our relationship, but that didn't matter to Kate. She loved me for who I was. We eloped after only 6 months of dating and moved in together. Kate started her practice at our new home, and life began to make sense. I didn't have to worry about money anymore, and Kate suggested I quit teaching to focus more on my novel. I've been writing a book, but my creativity and willpower took a dive when I started teaching. Sitting at my desk all day was dull and isolating. I sometimes wondered if I was meant to even be a writer. If I was even meant to be a writer. To decompress, I'd take walks in the park and watch the landscapers cut the grass and trim the hedges. I felt an odd kinship towards them and fantasized about riding on one of their lawnmowers in the hot sun. Anything was better than being crammed at my desk, but I knew Kate would be disappointed if I gave up writing entirely. The boredom got to me one day. I just couldn't stand being trapped in my study for another 8 hours. Kate was at a medical conference, so I had the whole house to myself for a few days. After 1 or 2 bottles of wine, I found myself standing outside Kate's office. Kate was very protective of her office space, and I couldn't step foot in there unless I brought her lunch. But I was drunk, and my curiosity got the better of me, so I went in. Kate's office was smaller than I remembered. It had olive green walls and was usually dimly lit with candles. There was a relaxing waterfall fountain in the back corner, and when you lay on the chaise lounge, you felt like you were in a tropical paradise. I sat down to clear my head when I noticed another door in the room. I was sure I'd never seen it before. I opened the door and was greeted by a black room with soundproofed walls. In the middle of the room was a tiny round table with 2 lounge chairs. An old light bulb hung from the ceiling. What the hell was this place? It felt strangely familiar, and I felt anxious when I explored it. In the corner of the room was a dusty filing cabinet. It must have contained patient records. I know I shouldn't have opened it, but I was still inebriated enough to do something irresponsible. I opened the top drawer, but it only contained one thing, a wrinkled composition notebook. I picked up the notebook and realized it was someone else's journal. pages and found through Kate's notes that the therapy seemed to be working, though Jack's disorder desperately tried to fight it. There were several documents on hypnotherapy and a letter from a former professor on his experience implementing the procedure. I knew from Jack's journal that he had vague memories of being hypnotized and that they manifested into his dreams. This was wrong. A photograph slid out of one of the papers in the folder. I picked it up to examine it. It was a picture of Kate and a man I assumed to be Jack. He was burly, with cropped black hair and a bushy beard, and an apparent farmer's tan. He looked familiar, but I didn't think I'd ever seen him before. Maybe I learned too much about this man, but I'm deciding to confront Kate about him. She always preaches that honest conversations strengthen relationships, so now is the time. I'm going to finish up writing here and then wait for Kate to get home. It may be painful, but I need to do this for myself, and maybe even for Jack, wherever he may be. Wherever he may be. And it's, sort of typoed as if he were, maybe fell on the computer or something when he was typing it. And then I think that the next section is meant to go out to the reader. It says, I suppose I owe you an explanation. I'm honestly impressed at how much of a sleuth you are. I have no idea how you came across Tom's musings, though it does not matter. Fine, I'll grant you this one favor. Jack came to me as a patient in the early 2000s. He was a gardener who drove his large truck through a bar during a manic episode. I must admit he was quite striking when I met him. Tall, muscular, and hairy. Exactly my type physically. He wasn't to swim. The realization had just struck them, and fear was starting to take hold. Bet they're kicking themselves about that ladder, I offered. Yeah, another mouthful of noodles. She was definitely avoiding conversation. My pocket gave another subtle buzz. I carefully looked and wished I hadn't. Harriet is dead. She killed her. Get out. A chill ran down my spine, strong enough to physically lift me to my feet. Sophie definitely noticed, tilting her head ever so slightly in my direction. Where are you going? I feebly threw back a kitchen, get a drink. The best I could scramble together, the room beginning to spin as I left. I threw my plate onto the countertop with a crash and leaned over the kitchen sink, breathing heavy, convinced I was going to be sick. I ran the water cold and splashed the sweat from my face. Everything felt wrong. Your drink. I turned to find Sophie standing in the doorway, facing me for the first time that evening, but I was struggling to focus. Behind her, the kids in the water were panicking. Someone had been hurt and blood was spreading around the hapless group. Your drink, Sophie repeated, firmer this time. Her form came back into clear focus as she set down a glass of water. My own glass of water, untouched. The glass of water I had left in the other room before departing to get a drink. Somehow, my stomach found somewhere lower to sink. As I stumbled for a response, my phone buzzed again. My hand instinctively reached for it, and to my dismay, Sophie noticed. Who keeps texting you tonight? She demanded, her stance rigid, her gaze burning right through me. Words wouldn't come. Emotion caught my eye. The plate of half-eaten chow mein I had set down was shifting, pulsating. Among the noodles were dark worms, subtly squirming and undulating. The nausea returned in a crashing wave as I pictured them inside me, alive and writhing around, not knowing how many I had already consumed. Clutching my food as if to keep it from turning, I pointed at the plate. What did you put in the food? She didn't respond, but stepped closer to the kitchen counter and set the glass down. The water within shimmered unnaturally in the starker light of the kitchen, as if laced with glitter. Her eyes shone through her glasses as she leaned over the counter. Have you had much to drink today? I think you're dehydrated. I swept the plate and the glass off the counter in her direction, and I ran without looking back. My knees were weak with whatever she had slipped into my food, but I made it into the garage, snatching up my car keys on the way. I scrambled into the front seat, slamming the door behind me and hitting the locks just as Sophie, or not Sophie, tried the handle. I backed up against the passenger door, gasping for every breath. My chest was taut, everything was spinning. I knew I was losing consciousness. I had dropped the keys somewhere, and as much as I tried to reach for them, I found only bruises, flailing my limp arm helplessly between the door and gearbox. I felt something trickle from the corner of my mouth. She stooped to glare at me through the driver's side window. Her glasses reflected the garage lights overhead, setting her eyes ablaze. For a moment I thought of those stranded kids in the movie, how they must be huddling together in the blood right about now, the sharks circling, waiting to strike. I thought of those sharks, and the darkness came. I awoke, my head a fog, to find the car locks and windows intact. A note sat on the window screen, facing inward, written against the garage door, the wheels spinning on the concrete floor. The door didn't budge. I backed up as much as the garage would allow and slammed my foot onto the accelerator. Metal met metal with a sickening screech, but the door hardly gave at all. Again I reversed and surged forwards. Three times, 4, 5. I could see a crack of light as the door weakened. 6, 7. Daylight was flooding in. It would only take a few more. 8, 9. At number 10, the front end of my car made it through the garage door entirely, jagged metal scraping against the windscreen. Maybe one more and I'd burst through those teeth and out of the shark's maw. As I backed up again, I caught sight of legs through the door. She had returned. Not Sophie was just outside, watching. She stood in front of the garage door, steadfast and still, blocking my path. Her position said one thing loud and clear: "You'll have to go through me." I almost hesitated. I tried to call Harriet. No answer. I thought about calling the police, but talked myself out of it. They wouldn't look too kindly on a fugitive rolling up in the murder weapon. The car somehow managed 30 miles until the crushed bodywork and hampered engine let it down. I imagine there were a few pieces of not Sophie caught up in the mess of metal. She was dragged along farther than I expected. Abandoning the mess of a vehicle by the roadside, I set off into the woods. The forest was deep, and I took a meandering route through. On the other side, I eventually came across a car rental company, took their most affordable option, and headed off in a different direction. Days have passed and I haven't been tracked down. I've been listening attentively to the news. There hasn't been any mention of the hit-and-run incident. I can only assume that means a victim hadn't been found. In my dreams, I see the red smear in the road I left behind. I see the misshapen husk of not Sophie. I see a swirl of those black worms she tried to feed me. I see her broken carcass haul itself upright, bent and disjointed. I see the worms fall from her open wounds. I can't keep going like this, living out of an overdue rental car, waking to screams that echo around the truck stops. I hardly recognize myself in the mirror. My eyes are sunken, my skin pale. My hair is coming out in clumps. I look hollow. I've never suffered from nosebleeds before, but it feels like I've always got a tissue in my hand, fighting a constant stream. Whatever damage those black worms had begun to cause, I doubt they're finished with me. I don't know what happened to my Sophie. I don't know what that thing was in her place. I need answers, or else I need this to be over. I need to go back. Wish me luck. Part 2. Okay. It's not just Sophie. This is bigger than I thought, and the worms are really making me suffer. I've made some startling discoveries since my last post, and in spite of my best efforts, I can't rationalize what's happening. I'm going to assume you're all up to speed with the story so far and continue where I left off. I can't thank you enough for your advice on my latest post. Well, I really appreciate the gesture, but I don't think things panned out quite the way I'd hoped. I was recommended a deworming medication called ivermectin and managed to track down some of the paste by visiting a farm supply shop. I took a gamble and bought an excessive supply of the stuff. Thankfully, the guy behind the counter was stoned out of his skull and either didn't notice that I looked like a walking corpse or didn't care. Either way, the only question he asked was, "What for?" and he seemed satisfied with my mumbled response of, "Animals." I think I'm getting better at this deception thing. was a chance, however slim, that I might find her here alive. Failing that, I might at least find out what happened to her. A marked police car rolled up in front of me, just on time. I had called ahead, claiming there had been an altercation between Sophie and Harriet, bookending my story with half-truths to make it easier to weave. I told them Sophie had gone over to confront Harriet about a missing phone. I told them a friend had heard a commotion while walking past that night. Shouting, things being thrown. I told them Harriet was unpredictable, with a dangerous reputation. Then I finished with the absolute truth. I told them Sophie hadn't come home for days, and I was gravely worried. They almost caught me out when they asked why I hadn't reported her missing already. I choked on my own words, launching into a fit of hacking coughs, but somehow that worked to my advantage. "You don't sound too healthy yourself," they said, handing me an excuse which I clung to like driftwood after a shipwreck. Somehow everything was going better than I expected. 2 uniformed police officers approached Harriet's door. One knocked while the other took a step away and glanced around the street. Instinctively, I shrunk down in the car seat as they looked in my direction, then chided myself as I realized how suspicious the move would seem if I were spotted. I awkwardly scooted back upright, and the last scraps of my confidence dissolved when I noticed the police officer staring right at me. The window glare had not worked in my favor as I'd hoped. They had witnessed the whole of my pathetic pogo dance routine and leaned in to whisper something to their partner. Both were facing me now. One took out a notepad. I wanted to shrink back down into the footwell, but told myself, look normal, be normal, and held my ground for a second, until my nose erupted with another enormous bleed. I swore loudly, grabbing a thick wad of tissues and holding my face down into it, waiting for the draining flow to stop. By the time it cleared and I raised my head, the officers had disappeared into the house. I blinked, relief giving way to despair before it could even take hold. My plan had hinged on witnessing either Sophie or Harriet answering the door, and now I was cast into unknown territory. I waited, weighing my options against one another, but the more I turned them over, the more my plan came apart, as if held together by the cheapest glue, logic could buy. Looking back, it's clear that I slipped into the worst anxiety spiral I had experienced for years, but at the time it was nothing so simple. What would I have actually done if Sophie had answered? Ran to her. I'd have no way of knowing if it was her or the imitation, and I could be running into a death trap, or worse. And if it had been Harriet who answered, what the hell was I planning on saying? Sophie told me you were dead. Also, have you seen her lately, and are you sure it's actually her? At some point, I felt like the conversation had been clear in my head, scripted word for word through a dozen different outcomes, but everything suddenly felt so blurry and uncertain. Sweat flooded my face. The road in front of me seemed to stretch on forever, shrinking to nothing. What was I hoping to gain from being here? The steering wheel pulsed, swelling along with the rest of the car interior. I felt like I was being crushed, running out of space and air. Why was I here? I fought for breaths that wouldn't come. I fumbled and failed to open the window, painted the inside of the car door with vomit and else was drawing in. A breeze struck me as I left the car, cutting deeper through my saturated shirt. I caught a glimpse of myself in the wing mirror, a corpse-clad Neapolitan canvas of puke and blood. Would Sophie even recognize me like this? No matter. All I could think about was finding her, or finding evidence of what had happened to her. While there was still a chance she was alive, I had to try. I had to go inside. I had to. The house sat detached from its neighbors. Identical buildings with identical lawns and driveways. Aside from their numbers and the odd flourish of colored curtains laid by particularly daring residents, there was nothing to tell them apart, as was the way with many of these new-build estates. It was, of course, the interior that mattered, where the mask gave way to truth. The street was graveyard quiet as I flanked Harriet's house. A side gate led to the back garden, barely waist height and unlocked. Dark blinds obscured all the windows, not a glimmer of light shining through. The place was empty as far as I could tell, and the windows were open. I pondered the best way to approach entry and, on a whim, tried the back door with the weight of my shoulder. It clicked open, and I stumbled inside, my knee landing hard on the tiled kitchen floor with a resounding thump. A hiss of pain escaped, and I reflexively clamped my palm over my mouth. The house was dead quiet in response. Pain was shooting through my leg as I hauled myself up to feebly lean against the countertop. I pulled out my phone, turned on the torchlight, and cast it around the room, the beam shaking as I fought to keep my hand steady. Just a kitchen, oven, microwave, fridge covered with tacky magnets, kettle, toaster, dirty dishes, a vase of flowers, a few days past their prime. Regular old kitchen, nothing unexpected, eerie in the stark spotlight, but just a kitchen. I took a deep breath and continued into the house. The stairway banister cast prison bar shadows up the walls as I passed. I swept the torchlight around the living room and bathroom without gleaming much information, and then I saw the door. Set into the staircase, this door either led to a cupboard or a basement. I swallowed with all the ease of ingesting a golf ball. If this house held secrets, my gut told me they would be found here. I opened the door. There were stairs, and they went down. My light spilled into the narrow space, barely lighting the bottom of the passage, but enough to show me Sophie. She was standing there in the darkness, in the same green dress she'd wore when I last saw her. Her hair was its usual wavy mess. Her back was towards me, but when she noticed the light, she turned. It was a sluggish movement, as if she was dazed. Her gaze met the lower stairs and followed them upward. Her eyes widened as she saw me. She raised an arm, pointed directly at me, took a deep, deliberate breath, and screamed. She screamed at me, her finger extended, a screeching cry of a scream, someone being burned alive, but this than the bugs. 3 more figures were standing by the car between me and my escape. Tiny legs brushed up my shins, the first of the swarm flowing over the top of my socks. I yelped, kicking out as I took off in a flailing sprint down the street, swatting at moths as they dived in front of my face. Through the haze of wings, I saw the neighbors in their doorways, each lit from behind like in some 50s alien abduction movie. Each of them raised an arm, each pointed at me. Each one echoed the same screech of a scream as I passed them. Door after door was the same. 10 houses, 14, 20. I lost count. Pointed fingers and piercing screams ringing in my head. On and on, silhouettes and screams, as if the world had conspired toward my exile. Tears streaked my face as I ran, longer and harder than I felt I ever had. The cloud of bugs seemed to thin. The cloud of bugs seemed to thin. The road led to a forest path, which I took without a second thought. The promise of darkness was far more alluring than the lights I was leaving behind. I knew I had been seen entering the forest, so I deliberately took a difficult and unpredictable path. I emerged, seemingly a lifetime later, on a quieter street. I was battered and bruised, I was scratched and torn, but I was still breathing, and I didn't stop running until I had put 3 more roads between myself and the madness. Reason finally took over from panic as I leaned against a lamppost to catch my breath in the night's frigid embrace. I couldn't rely on picking up a trail from Harriet's house. Whatever this was, it had spread through the entire neighborhood. It could replicate people, and the entities they became were capable of working together, coordinating wordlessly. I didn't know whether the Sophie I saw whisked away by the police was the original or another copy. If it was not Sophie, I didn't know if the police officers were still human or not, and if they were, I didn't know how long that would remain the case. I needed time, I needed to be away from here, and most importantly, I needed medical attention. I made the most important phone call of my life and requested to be sectioned in a mental hospital. I told them I had an anxiety disorder, had been away from my medication for days, and I explained everything I had seen tonight. I explained that, of course, I know none of this could have been real, and yet I still saw it all. I said that I needed help, and more than anything that I needed to be isolated. My greatest act of deception was to claim that I knew I was mad. I've been treated well since I arrived. I have my own room, and since I'm here on a voluntary basis, I still have my phone and internet access. There are communal areas which I don't use. I can leave whenever I want. I don't. I requested a deworming medication and was given some sickly banana-flavored syrup. They won't allow me the dosage I want, but this is better than nothing. I haven't noticed any worms in what I bring up, and I still feel like death, but I'll persist. The nosebleeds still come, but now I can shower and keep myself clean. They bring me strong antipsychotics. They bring me tranquilizers. I thank the staff, and then I hide them. I have been feeling safe here. The past few weeks have practically breezed by. The horrors I lived through could almost have been a dream. Each night, moths gather at my window. They flock to the pane as if adhering no sensation or control from the waist down, either from the swelling around her spine or the damage to her brain. It was unclear whether or not she would ever be able to walk again. They thanked me for my testimony after the incident and expressed sympathy for my present condition. Trauma can do some real damage, one officer said, gesturing around my compact clinical room. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to struggle. I felt something slip out of place. The mountain on my chest cracked and crumbled, breaking me from my guilty days. What testimony did I give? They told me how I had been assaulted by the burglar who I claimed had drugged me, that I regained consciousness in the garage minutes after the incident, and that I had called the ambulance. They told me how I had stayed by Sophie's side throughout her recovery and how they could have sworn I was still there with her. I was still there with her. My head spun, a high-pitched ringing sound growing in my ears. Sophie was alive after all this time, but she was not alone. Whatever had been there when she woke was not me. One officer's brow furrowed. I realized that his eyes had been burning into me for some time. He expressed how strange it was that some of my interactions with the police from her bedside appeared to overlap with the time I had been resident in the psych ward. He said they had already checked with the staff, who confirmed that I had not left since my admittance, and then he asked me outright how I managed to be in two places at once. Perhaps I should have been smarter. Maybe insisted that I speak with a solicitor or played dumb, but I didn't. I told them everything. The bugs, the worms, the imitation people. I admitted to trespassing in Harriet's house. I admitted to abandoning the overdue rental car. And I admitted to hospitalizing my wife. The police couldn't quite piece everything together from my account. My story was comprehensive and thorough, but it seemed to my unbridled honesty was indistinguishable from madness. I don't know if I'd been seeking belief or sympathy, but what little they offered of either were pleasantries alone. No longer was I a voluntary admission. In that moment, I handed over my freedoms and I made myself a suspect in Sophie's assault. The police spoke to the medical staff, who agreed to keep me securely from then onwards. I had my phone and other personal effects taken from me, and my door was kept locked from then on. The days passed like a kidney stone. I was interviewed no less than 5 times over the ensuing week by a sequence of increasingly perplexed uniforms. My story was doubted and dissected, probed and reiterated. My identity was checked, double-checked, and checked again. My sanity was called into question and ultimately dismissed. The only constant was the horde of bugs gathering at my window each night. Just as I had grown used to ignoring the moths and their uncanny impressions of my wife, the congregation grew. They were joined by dozens of other bugs, spiders, millipedes, and all manner of many-legged little monsters. I kept my window shut in spite of the summer heat, preferring the sweltering heat to the threat of invasion. The orderlies and other medical staff who had been so friendly since my arrival now regarded me with hesitance and due suspicion. My delusions were no longer able to be dismissed as fantasy and fiction. Word had spread that there was a carbon copy of me walking around elsewhere in the hospital. I overheard staff chattering nervously about bugs by the windows. More than once I heard another patient screaming hysterically about worms in their food. which set my phone and the rest of my personal property. I've turned off the cameras, the porter said, and deactivated the locks. The fear was plain on his face as he explained that he believed every word of my story. He looked like he hadn't slept in a year, the skin under his eyes dragged down by the weight of what he'd witnessed. He spoke of seeing the hordes of bugs with his own eyes. He claimed that some of the staff were no longer themselves and that it was no longer safe in the ward. "Find your wife," he urged me. "At least get out of here." As if I needed any encouragement. I was out of the secure psychiatric wing as quickly as my sleep-burdened limbs would allow, bursting through swing doors and hauling myself up flights of stairs on my way to the ward holding my wife. These parts of the hospital were quiet at night, save for the squeak of my soles on the polished floors. Their shrill echoes went unanswered. 6 beds sat on the ward. 5 were empty, the 6th had its curtains partially drawn. I stepped closer to peer around the fabric. Though the bed was lit dimly by the screens of machines and monitoring devices, I recognized my Sophie immediately. She was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling with soft breaths. A tube descended from her nose, an IV drip led to her arm. Her head was bandaged, and her blankets hid casts. Her glasses sat on the bedside table next to a jug of water, reflecting the display of her steady pulse. And sitting beside her bed was me. He raised his head from his hands to look back at me, mirroring my disbelief as our gazes met. It was incredible. His unkempt hair was mine. His narrow eyes uncanny. His lips parted in my own expression of surprise. He wore my skin and wore it as well as I ever did. In my haste to get to Sophie, I had neglected to form a plan for this occasion, but it seemed my doppelganger was caught similarly off guard. We stared at one another, at ourselves, open-mouthed, each waiting for the other to make the first move. I was paralyzed. Should I talk first? Should I go in swinging? Should I look for a weapon? For a peace offering? My chest fluttered. It felt as if my organs intended to be free of me. My limbs ached to mutiny, to carry me from this confrontation. I was faced with a twin and with the truth that I was no longer the master of myself. A subtle movement cut through the stillness between us, and we both looked towards the bedside table. A brown moth sat atop Sophie's glasses, the largest I'd seen, easily the size of both lenses combined. Its wings rippled, a bold shade of pink shining through their motion. I felt my abdomen churn as if in response. A breeze from an open window shot down the back of my neck, brought by the wind, a whisper, low and soft. "Come to us." The moth held its wings wide, its substance shimmering in the low light. Images flooded my head, memories barely half my own. I saw Sophie that night, her imposter, rather. I saw the worms she fed to me, the water she tried to make me drink, shining and unnatural. Then I was in the car, locked in the garage. Nauseous and barely awake. I was out of myself, watching as I drifted in and out of consciousness, my head rolling. The Sophie replacement had placed a note on the windscreen and left, but I was oblivious. I saw myself heave, felt the weight and force of my stomach purging its contents into the footwell. I opened the door and collapsed out of it onto the floor of the garage. As I lay slumped there, as if it had just become aware of its own surroundings, and then the vision was gone from me. My consciousness snapped back to the hospital in an instant. The revelation hit me like a cannonball to the chest. All along, Sophie had been here, and I, the real me, had been beside her while she recovered. I had believed her companion to be the copy, the bug-made imitation, while all this time it had been me. I stared down at my hands, my skin crawling. I could distinctly see the shapes of spiders and beetles jostling for position within the fraudulent flesh. The giant moth sat on the rim of the water jug, its wings shining in the half-light. Particles drifted like glitter from its fluttering, lacing the water. The liquid shimmered. An image returned to me, a still-frame snapshot of the kitchen confrontation with the fake Sophie. This concoction before me was the drink I had refused, and I now understood its significance. Somehow, this was an integral part of the process. The worms and their incubation was only the first steps. This glitter-laced water, this moth dust cocktail, was the binding point. This was the link to whatever controlled the swarm. By refusing the drink, I had cursed myself. A bug-born replacement with independence. Come to us. I communed with the moth at length. To my surprise, it was eager to avoid violence and open to negotiation. I was asked what it would take for me to drink the water willingly. With apprehension, I set out my terms. Firstly, I was to be permitted to finish and publish this account in my own words. It was something I needed to do, to give my brief independence a sense of purpose and completion. And I assured the hive mind that this tale would be unbelievable enough to prove no existential threat to its expansion. Second, I ensured that both Sophie and her real husband would be unharmed and granted safe passage from the clutches of this growing phenomenon. I was told